Then it is 9 a.m. Eastern time, so we will go ahead and get started with our agenda today. I'm not sure how many of you just joined for the first part and not for the networking, so I'll go ahead and repeat my beginning introductions. Welcome, depending on where in the world you're joining us from, either good morning or good afternoon. My name is Brooke Ruprecht, and I am a consultant at the German American Chamber of Commerce, headquartered in Chicago, and I am in an office in the Metro Detroit region. As we mentioned in our breakout room, we're fighting a lot of snow, but we see that, of course, we have some attendees from the south that the weather looks a little bit more optimistic there. So dreaming of warmer days ahead, hopefully soon. I would like to welcome everybody officially to our first webinar of our new government-funded series. It is our Transatlantic Webinar series, Leading Through Crises. The whole reason for this, of course, is to foster transatlantic communication and collaboration to come out of challenges and threats posed by the COVID-19 pandemic stronger. So the first topic being the digitalization of sales. We're really excited to have you here and to hear from our speakers that will talk about their experiences shifting to a digital format. On that note, I would like to quickly thank our speakers today. We have Gary Fly, president of the Brooks Group, who will talk about how he's shifted the digital sales training. What used to be in-person trainings now all obviously have to be in a digital format. And then we have Ralf Weiser from Alexanderwerk. Ralf will talk about his company's approach, shifting their sales models to digitalization. And then last but not least, we'll have Tom Mitchell from Messe Düsseldorf North America, headquartered in Chicago, talk about the virtual trade shows in 2021. Really quick, for those of you who don't know us, I would like to give a little bit of background to the German American Chambers of Commerce. Together with our three sister chambers in New York, Atlanta, and San Francisco, the German American Chambers of Commerce are the official representative of German industry and trade in the US and are part of a network of 140 German chambers abroad in 92 countries across the globe. First, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping rules as we go into the webinar. I think everybody at this point in 2021 is pretty used to the formats, but if you could please mute yourselves to avoid background noise for our presenters, that would be very appreciative. In addition, my colleague is here for technical support. She is branded as GACC Midwest. So if you experience any difficulties throughout the webinar, hearing, or for whatever reason, if anything goes wrong, please feel free to use the chat function to message GACC Midwest, and we'll do our best to support you. In addition, for those of you who aren't as familiar with Zoom, in the top right-hand corner, you'll see a view button, and you can change the view either to speaker view or gallery view. Currently, I'm in gallery view, and I can see everybody, but once we get started, you can speak to presenter, and then you will see just the one presenter or speaker that we have as they are speaking. Lastly, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box, and we'll be sure to address them. And then we will go ahead and get started. Next, I would like to hand over the screen to my colleague, Jessica Ferkla. She is the Deputy Director of Consulting and Corporate Development Services at the German American Chamber of Commerce of the Midwest. Jessica is going to help us out and give us a brief overview of the Transatlantic Webinar Series initiative, this government-funded initiative, where we're going with it, why the idea was born, and what we hope to accomplish over the year. So, Jessica, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Brooke. Yeah, I already said it in my breakout session, and I'm really excited about this timely topic of digitalization of sales models as a kickoff to our Transatlantic Webinar series, Leading Through Crises. Welcome. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Very excited to have you all and exchange best practices, which is really our goal. Brooke mentioned a few times that this program is government funded. And it is a program that's supported by the Transatlantic Program of the Federal Republic of Germany, funded by the European Recovery Program, it's called ERP, of the Federal Ministry of Economics and Energy in Germany. I know that's a mouthful. What's interesting, though, is this European Recovery Program goes way back to the Marshall Plan, out of World War II, and it still is supposed to keep the relationships up between Germany and the United States on a business, on a trade, on a R&D level. So that's just some interesting background where these programs still come in to keep up relationships. And yeah, as we all know, we've had an interesting last year, interesting start to this year when it comes to the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's changed our lives overall. And we want to now target with this webinar series all the different parts, or a lot of the different parts that have changed, and where hopefully we can exchange best practices between Germany and the US and across the Atlantic. There have been a lot of unexpected disruptions across supply chains, across business. The economy has been impacted by this pandemic. And for example, for Germany as an exporting nation, or where export plays a really big role for the economy, and where the US is a really important sales market, that has been a piece of worry, and it has been a strong piece of discussion, and where a lot of people had open questions of how to deal with trying to export to the United States from Germany. So there have been a lot of considerations of new ways, ideas, and lots of, I think, trial and error of making sure those trade chains stay secured. Now, we're all looking at different new approaches. We're trying to get best practices. I think, if anything, this pandemic has led us to being very open to try new things out of necessity to some extent. So, all these threats that have been imposed on everybody really were the reason why this series was born. And it is a year-long series of webinars. And then we also have some smaller, more intimate workshops planned around them, where we want to have the opportunity to exchange best practices, to really come out with ideas, with solutions. So, we're very goal-oriented in this program. And the program is going to culminate in a conference in 2022. Which is supposed to be in a hybrid format. As we all know, we'll see how that's going to look. We don't know yet, but yeah, there's a little bit of playing by ear that has been coming into this, into everybody's process, I think, through the pandemic. So you might have already noticed in the breakout rooms, but we have a diverse group together, and that is by design. We want to have we have people from businesses, from economic development, from associations, from chambers of commerce, political organizations, or some policy building, because we think that it's really helpful if we get all these different perspectives and maybe come up with new ideas from people that we usually are not interacting with as much maybe in our daily lives. So the intention is to really facilitate then a grassroots approach where we can work together and come up with new ideas. So to find hopefully also some add-on initiatives or collaborations that come out of this program. Now, we said this is a kickoff event. So this is the first event of the series. And just to give you a little bit of an outlook of upcoming programs, next month, we're looking at supply chain shocks or supply chain disruptions, and how everybody has dealt with them, and best practices. Maybe also an outlook, to how how logistics, how supply chain is going to adapt or change in the future. Very interested in that too, what we can find out. And other topics we have planned are, for example, distribution of financial aid, how it's been done in Germany or in the US. Some of you might have heard the term Kurzarbeit, which is how Germany deals with economic crises and has for a long time. And so that's going to be an interesting model that some US states even have adopted, and how you have dealt with distribution of financial aid. But really, we want to have a big theme around business models, and now they have changed, business models in real estate, business models in healthcare, business models when it comes to startups, talking to startup hubs and get some insights. how are the leaders of tomorrow, if you will, going to approach business after coming out of the pandemic. We want to look into topics like cybersecurity, like workforce safety, food and beverage industry, how they have been disrupted and dealt with the pandemic and what it has brought. So those are just some teasers. We will try to keep you posted on topics that we think are hopefully relevant to you. And very excited again for the speakers. Brooke has already mentioned it and we'll introduce them, but Gary Fly, Ralf Weiser, and Tom Mitchell, very excited for their remarks. And with that, thanks again for being here. We're very excited to be discussing this topic of digitalization of sales models with you, and I'll hand back to Brooke.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. Very well said. And yeah, Jessica has been involved from the very beginning, coming up with this concept and seeing a need for it, of course. So really thank you for your overview of how it was born. And I hope all of you continue to come back and follow the series along. There will continue to be networking options and topics, of course, that we'll dive into that we hope you can have benefit from, whether it's in your business or assisting your members or even discussing with your network. So excuse me, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think we can go ahead and introduce our first speaker. First off, we have Gary Fly, and Gary is the president of Brooks Group. As a brief introduction, for more than 25 years as a senior executive, Gary has led a diverse portfolio of mid-market businesses and enterprises to new levels of revenue success, innovation, and client satisfaction. In his new role as president of the Brooks Group, Gary has shepherded his team through the post-COVID-19 next normal. And in this new age we are living in, Gary will focus on the continued refinement of the company's mission with an emphasis on embracing the shift to virtual delivery of training programs, new product development, and consultative services. Excuse me. So Gary, I think I saw you in the audience.
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. All right, I will hand the screen over to you.
All right.
We're looking forward to your presentation.
Well, great. Thank you, Brooke. I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody allowing me to speak this morning, and I'm excited to share some of what we are doing and have done. Let me see if I can share my screen now. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes, we are. And I also wanted to say really quick that Gary, unfortunately, will have to leave us at 10, so in 45 minutes. So if you do have questions after his presentation, we'll go ahead and take those right away. And
great.
Go ahead, Gary.
As Brooke mentioned, we are a sales training company. This gives a little bit of an oversight.
If I can interrupt, we just see your background, the mountains, I think maybe it left.
Let's try that again, sorry.
No worries. Now we see it.
Okay.
Okay.
And are you seeing the correct mode, or do you have the slides on the side?
We see the slides on the side. Yep, on the left-hand side of the screen.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries. Now the mountains again.
Maybe
well,
I mean, you work with two screens?
Yes.
Yes, then you have to change the screens.
Yes. Sorry, I had it queued up.
If you switch in the presentation mode, you have to switch in another screen. I mean, you have screen 1 and screen 2.
Yes.
We also can perhaps stop share and reshare. Maybe that'll make that also your
Okay. All right.
We have time, so no worries.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yep, there we go.
How about now? I apologize.
No worries.
All right. As Brooke mentioned, we are a sales training company. We typically work with, on the private sector, manufacturers, healthcare folks, and ag chemical. We've been in business about 43 years, have trained almost 2,000 salespeople, and we've actually built our business using virtual tools. So as the pandemic unfolded, we recognized that really one of the things that we could do to help our clients was just kind of share what we actually do and how we go to market. So I thought that that's what I would do this morning, and actually talk about some very tactical things and show you all, or explain how we go to market and actually sell, use digital tools to sell our services. As a framework, these are some of the things that shape how we pick tools, what tools we do pick, and our methodologies and our processes. You can see the stats, but you know, for example, you know, 8 is the average amount of cold calls it takes to reach a prospect, and 80% of sales require 5 follow-up calls after the meeting. These sort of things inform us in a way that says, hey, we've got to be willing and deliberate to keep going back, right? So we pick tools, we use a methodology that helps us do that. You'll see that 23% increase in open rates when you use new in a subject line in an email. That tells us that we got to keep massaging our language and whatnot. So these are the sorts of challenges that we want to mitigate or automate if possible. So as I think about our business, I've divided it in our sales initiatives into top of the funnel, mid funnel, and bottom of the funnel. So top of the funnel is our awareness type of work. It's the first time that people, a client becomes aware of who we are, and it's really our chance to introduce ourselves. And we do this digitally 2 ways. First is through our website. So you'll see a screenshot of our website there on the left. But we drive about 90% of our new business comes from our website and our inbound activities there. And so it's important for us to have a website that speaks to the marketplace and is easy to convert on, if you will. And there's 3 tools that we use primarily to manage our website health, and that's Hotjar, Google Analytics, and Semrush. Hotjar is a very inexpensive tool that allows us to see how people behave on our website. Where are they going? Are they clicking through? Are they staying all the way down the different pages or whatnot? So we can tell. I looked at it this morning from our homepage. The highest traffic next page is our about page, and we have great stickiness on that about page. Over 50% of the people that hit the top of the page make it all the way to the bottom. So that tells us there's some stuff of interest there, and that we need to make it, again, easy to convert. So we'll put calls to action, we'll put all sorts of things throughout that page, recognizing that people are staying there and going through it. And then Semrush is really an interesting tool. Again, it's pretty inexpensive, that tells us about site health. It gives us interesting scores on visibility. It allows us to track our competitors and see how their sites are doing. But it's a tool that we use regularly to manage site health. On the right are the tools that our sellers use. So they use Outreach, Zoom Info, HubSpot, Forecastable, LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and Zoom, obviously. The first couple are really designed to get information about a potential client. So Zoom Info is a great database for information about potential clients and whatnot. HubSpot allows us to track those folks all the way through the funnel. So once they hit the site or they open up an email, we'll then be able to track everything they do throughout the sales process. So that's how we manage, or those are the tools that we use to drive top of the funnel activity. Then as we go to the middle of the funnel, it changes a little bit. And these are all tools used by our sellers, but our sellers spend a fair amount of time doing it. In mid-funnel, what we're doing is we're trying to learn about the clients and the client's needs so that we can start to create solutions for them, so that we can go to them with some sort of a plan of action, if you will. So mid-funnel activity is really around due diligence on our side and around good conversations and building rapport. So that's why these tools are used there. You know, the usual suspects are Zoom and email, but the website is a heavy one. Dun & Bradstreet, again, a great source of information. And two that you may not be thinking about are Soapbox and text. So Soapbox is a video, or is a service that allows you to record a video very easily on your laptop and also show things that are on your screen at the same time. We find it to be a very powerful way to send a follow-up to a question that a client might have, to provide a little additional information, that sort of thing. And the texting is also something that our sellers use when they know that when they have a texting relationship with a potential client, they know that the certainty of that client closing goes up significantly. So these are mid-funnel tools that we use to, again, do our due diligence, learn about the client, their potential needs, and really start to formulate an idea about what a solution might look like for them. Which leads us to the bottom of the funnel. This is where we start presenting our solutions. This is where we start negotiating with the clients. And this is where we hope to have a letter of agreement signed. Again, you'll see some of the normal suspects in here. Zoom, for example, we use DocuSign or HelloSign to speed the signing process. Actually, we have found that once we go to electronic signatures, it closes the time that it takes for us to get a contract back, right? So those are very simple things. We use Prezi a lot to do our presentations in. It's a very interactive, kind of animated, almost PowerPoint type of deal. But the two programs in here, or two solutions in here you may not be familiar with. One is called Gong. So we literally record all of our calls, and it's a video recording, and it allows our sellers to go back and re-listen to what the conversation was. It allows us to measure things like how much time was our salesperson speaking versus how much time was the client speaking, and the like. And so we find that to be a powerful tool. We use it for coaching our salespeople, and our salespeople use it as a way to go back and listen to their own calls. And then the other one is, again, we use HubSpot to build portal pages. So when we have a client that we start to develop a solution for, we often will create a portal page that has all the different elements of that proposal on there. And it may have a little video in there, it may have some other things. But by putting it in HubSpot, we're able to see how often the client comes back and looks at it to see if they're still engaged with it, if they are using it, and that sort of thing. So it tells us sort of anecdotally how interested a potential client is in the proposal that we've put in front of it, and how well or how widespread throughout the organization it's being used. So those are the actual tools that we use day in and day out to build our business. I hope that that's helpful in at least framing up how we think about tools and sorts of things that that you can do through the different stages of the funnel. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, what I am finding and what we're finding in our conversations with potential clients is that oftentimes they mistake these virtual tools as the solution instead of the entire process. So they want to use these tools independent of their sales process, which is really a big mistake for them, right? So these are tools that maybe substitute or enhance what you were doing pre-pandemic, but the basics still matter. So if you had a sales process pre-pandemic, you still need, and it worked for you, you still need to have that process in place. You just need to think about those tools as they might plug into that process. So that's why I outlined it as top of the funnel, mid funnel, and bottom of the funnel, because that's kind of how I think most sales processes lay out. But we are very intentional about trying to match a tool to the point in the process where it makes sense to move the process along. We want to increase our deal velocity. We want to reduce friction of the deal as it's moving through. So that's the mindset we take to do that. So I want to just review a few of the basics that, again, we hammer home with our own sellers day in and day out, right? But building targeted lists and profiles. So again, we'll use Zoom Info, we'll use LinkedIn Sales Navigator primarily to do that. but we want to have really targeted lists that make sense for us. So for example, on Tuesday, we started an outreach campaign, and every day we're going to the marketplace. We're going to 200 new potential clients. So we'll do that for 5 days. So we'll build a campaign for 1,000 outreach. We're reaching out to 1,000 different people, 200 a day, and so we want to know who these people are. We want to make sure that they fit the profile of our ideal client, and we do that using those tools. We have some best practices that we have learned ourselves. We do an awful lot of research. We work with third parties also to do research, but there's some basic things you can be doing to increase the effectiveness or the likelihood of the tools you're using being effective. For example, the best time to cold call is between 4 and 5 p.m. Connection rates increase as the day, week, and month advances, right? It's an interesting thing. So we literally change our sales process as the weeks and the month progress, and we start selling and marketing different products as the month progresses, right? So we time that the stuff we're going to the marketplace with based on the week of the month and the month of the quarter. Collaborative language in emails help improve success rates. And if you use social selling, like I'm talking about this idea of our outreach campaign to the 1,000 people to fill the pipeline, we find that we have a much more success with the ultimate deal closing. We're big on video prospecting, right? We use a lot of how-to information and that we push out in video, and you'll see that we do it on all sorts of different channels. We do it through LinkedIn, we do it through YouTube, and we do it with soapbox videos and directly out through email, right? And we find that it can help at any point in the sales process. But we work hard to do it in a customized way. That's why Soapbox is so easy, or QuickTime. I don't know if any of y'all have used that, but we find that it creates much more engagement and it gets people to think about us a little bit differently, and it positions us differently in front of the marketplace. A couple of keys with that, right? We want to have a studio or a nice look. So the background we want to make sure it looks right and professional. We encourage our people to write scripts and to practice it so that they really get to the point and have kind of a high impact as opposed to just a rambling message that they might have. And I mentioned Gong earlier. So there's some pretty powerful information that comes out of that. So they are in the business of helping sales organizations. So they record and measure an awful lot of things. But they found that if you keep your presentation to 9 minutes or less, you're going to be much more effective. And you can see on the charts that if you get up to 11 minutes, right, which is a very insignificant difference in time, it's only 2 minutes difference, the deal closures go down, right? So again, it speaks to being concise, making sure you have a script, making sure you know what you're going to say. It also speaks to understanding the communication style of the person you're communicating with, right? Are they a high D on the disc profile and they want their information kind of quick and bullet points, or are they much more theoretical and they want detailed explanations, etc.? So understanding the profile of the person you're talking with or negotiating with will help you put together your presentation. But again, Gong suggests that 9 minutes is kind of the ideal number. We've also found that talking less helps you connect more. So I mentioned that one of the measures we look at is how much time is our seller speaking versus how much time is the client listening or talking and whatnot. And so you can see that the top reps talk 40% of the time, but listen 54% of the time. We believe that that's critical as you build rapport to allow the client or potential client to speak, to really let them share what's going on with their organization. And if you're intently listening, you can ask much better questions as you probe to get to the real heart of the problem. And so, sometimes it has some consequences. You have to be comfortable with silence, and you need to spread your questions out. But again, this is a tool that we find to be invaluable as we continue to train our sellers, coach our sellers, and help them be more successful. I mentioned earlier communication styles, and I said high D on the disc profile. This is something that we actually train to and talk an awful lot about. And essentially our hypothesis is that if you understand your natural style, how you tend to communicate, and you understand how your client is, you'll be able to moderate your style or change your style to match the style of your client, and therefore improve the communication between the two, right? And so we ask our sellers, and in a virtual environment, it's a little more difficult, but we ask our sellers to go through these sorts of questions as they're trying to formulate this. The other thing we do is we ask them to analyze emails and correspondence as they get from the client. If, for example, the entire email is written in the subject line, we know that that's probably a high D, high energy person who's ready to move quickly and make decisions, right? So we spend a time, and we believe there's a big payoff if you really intentionally work to understand the style of communication that your potential client has and favors. And so then you can change how you communicate virtually, or you can be intentional about it. One of the things that we hear a lot about is cameras, right? Should cameras be on or should cameras be off? Well, Gong has done some studies on this, and they realized, or they have figured out that the closed one goes up 41% when cameras are on. So we insist on cameras always being on. Again, that means that we want to make sure our backgrounds look appropriate, that that we come across well on camera, that we have good lighting, that we have decent microphones, all of those sorts of things. It also allows us to observe the client as we talk about trying to understand their communication style. At least when they're when they're on camera, we're allowed to, we're able to see those nonverbal cues, right? That is so important, kind of in building a connection and understanding your client. And then the last thing we do, we work hard. We believe that as we are trying to tie up a deal, that it's important to prove your claim, right? So for us, it's all about ROI. You know, when somebody wants sales training, they want to know that there's going to be a benefit in doing that. If I invest $10,000 with you all, am I going to get more than $10,000 in return? And so the way we do that, and the way we think you can do it in the digital world, is through the website, through videos. You'll see us and all of our competitors have an award shelf, and et cetera. We do demos and trials, third-party endorsements, but you can see this is the list of things that we do to build credibility. And again, we'll direct or we'll use the appropriate ones of these based on the communication style, right? So if we know that somebody's a high theoretical that likes a lot of detail, we're going to send them case studies and journal articles. If we know somebody's a high D and a competitive person, we're going to send them awards and accolades and testimonials. So tying these sorts of things back to the individual person and what you're trying to do, we believe has big benefit and helps, again, increase deal velocity. The last thing that we'll talk about is we believe that it's important to be patient, right? You don't want to come across as pushy. You don't want to be disruptive. You don't want to be too eager. You want to be thoughtful when you're dealing with objections and handling, particularly in the negotiation phase, the kind of sticky points of the deal, right? So what we recommend and what we really coach our sellers on is to slow down, to be calm, to be deliberate, and to be thoughtful. So that's really, again, my hope was to share with you what we do. We've built the business this way. We train to this sort of methodology. We find that it works. But as we've shifted into this, as everybody else has shifted into this virtual world, we've recognized that it's a different dynamic for a lot of people, and it's a way of thinking that's different than it was when you could go on site easily and when you could carry a case with you and show samples, et cetera. So I hope that that's helpful. I hope that frames it up a little bit and maybe gives you some ideas on different tools that are out there and how you might go about it. So with that, I'll stop sharing and open it up for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Gary. I think that that was really insightful. And also I really liked in your presentation, that basics still matter. I think a lot of times
Right.
when we get in the digital format, we assume that the whole landscape around the proven methods of sales has changed. But no, it's still important, I think, for everyone to hear that things are developed and done for a reason. So I actually got a question in that I wanted to bring up to you. So one of the attendees wanted to know how some ways are that you can better engage larger groups in digital meetings. So that's coming from, it's hard in a virtual setting to have everyone feel as though they can speak up. In a meeting, is there ways for them to be more conversational and less presentational, especially, with sales, closing sales? Yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah. So that's a big challenge, right? So we actually try to limit the number of people in meetings. In our trainings, in fact, we will not allow more than 15 anymore in a single setting, because we want to be able to watch the screen, keep people engaged, and interact with them. If we are on a sales call, and I guess, is that the scenario you think, Brooke? Like if it's a sales call and it's a larger group?
Exactly.
Yeah. So we have done a couple of things. One is that we will have multiple people from our team on a call, but we assign very specific roles. So we'll have a lead person, typically the seller, who's a point person, but we might bring on an account manager whose job is to kind of listen and help manage the crowd. And actually they'll be texting or chatting the seller. You might ask Brooke a question, or it looks like so-and-so has tried to go off mute and they may have a question, but nobody's calling on them. So that we try to manage the crowd that way. In terms of making it interactive, it's a little bit more difficult, right? And so if it looks like it's going to be a larger crowd with a lot of that, we oftentimes will ask that they chat to one person. So that account manager becomes kind of the clearinghouse for questions, for moving things along. And it really depends on the objective of the call as well, right? Is it a discovery call where we're trying to have a lot of interaction, or is it maybe a presentation call where we're trying to talk about a solution? So, I don't know, there's not a perfect answer, I don't believe, for that, but those are some of the tactics and tips that we use.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I see that there have been a couple people that have sent what they're using and how they're adjusting to sales in the chat. So feel free to check out those other links people are sending, and thank you for sharing your best practice. Another question from the group would be, how would you advise a client who does not have a large sales marketing department or a large marketing budget to invest in these programs or software?
Yeah, so few of the ones that I shared with you were very inexpensive. So I don't remember the exact cost, but like Hotjar, I think $25 a month or $30 a month or something like that. Semrush, they have different sorts of platforms that, based on your size and whatnot. So we tend to try to find ones that are not terribly expensive. Now, HubSpot can be expensive, but what I would say is that depending on your business, like for us, the website and that digital side is absolutely critical. So even when dollars are limited, we will still invest in those sorts of things because it's absolutely critical for us. The bigger challenge is to ensure that the marketing and the marketing messaging is aligned with the sellers and what they're going to the marketplace with, right? So what we have done is we actually have what we call our smarketing group, which is the sales and marketing team together, because we want there to be consistency. We want there to be, we want the marketers to really support the sellers. And what we find by bringing them together every week is that we learn what's going on in the marketplace. So we'll tweak our language, we'll tweak our collateral, we'll tweak all the kind of stuff we're doing almost in real time to support what the sellers are bumping into in the marketplace. I think that there's just some of those tools that you need to have. We believe in HubSpot. We believe in Semrush. We believe in Hotjar. So we are big fans of LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And so from a kind of a basic toolkit point of view, I think that those are some things that you really need to have if you have any sort of digital presence. Would also suggest that DocuSign or HelloSign, and the reason we have both is frankly we're trying HelloSign. It's a much less expensive alternative than DocuSign, and we've been pleased with it. So, but we find that actually closes the time it takes to close a deal. So, those tools we find are critical and kind of basics that every toolkit would need, every company would need to have in their toolkit.
Okay. Thank you. One last quick question, and then we'll move on to Ralph. Is the fact that attention spans get shorter, as well as virtual event fatigue, something that is affecting you and your sales? And if so, how do you adapt to that challenge in a virtual format?
Yeah, so I think some of that goes back to that Gong research, right? We work really hard to keep it kind of 9 minutes or less in our presentations. We, our business is training people, so we do a lot of work on adult learning and what's going on with that. So we will create presentations that are a little bit different. So we mentioned Prezi. We will bring those sort of things in, video. So we'll have almost a multimedia sort of approach. Again, it doesn't have to be expensive. It can be soapbox, it can be Prezi, and the like. But we find that if we kind of change up the presentations, and it's not just a narrated PowerPoint for 9 minutes, but it's much more of a interactive kind of thing with some interesting visuals and some interesting video, that really does it. It keeps it engaged, or keeps people engaged. And bringing in some of our adult learning stuff, just like in our classroom, we never go more than 9 minutes without an activity, right? We'll do something different. We'll do a poll or a chat or a breakout room or those sorts of things. So it's the whole, we bring that into the sales process in a way of how do we divide it up, right? How do we keep it engaging? How do we not just drone on for a half an hour of a narrated PowerPoint, but do it in a way that's intriguing? And then I mentioned these HubSpot portals. Again, they're very quick and easy. When we deliver them to a client, a potential client, they think that we've spent days creating this platform, but what it does is it allows us to share information in a really efficient way that comes across as kind of a high touch, really polished thing. So again, going to your question, Brooke, it's a way for us to share information that's a little bit out of the box. It's a little bit disruptive, but it's intriguing and interesting. And so that's the basic mindset that we go to the sales marketplace with, if you will, when we're conveying and interacting with clients.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you so much. I think that helps answer a lot of questions. And I think it also provides really interesting insight into shifting things virtually and all of these different tools. I know you do have to go in 15 minutes. So what I would suggest, if there are more questions, we'll of course share your contact information, and people can reach out to you personally and address anything further from the presentation. But thank you so much, Gary, again, for your time and your presentation. It was very insightful.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. All right, next on the agenda, we have Ralf Weiser, and Ralf is the Vice President of Operations at Alexanderwerk. He has been the Vice President since 2019, and previously he was part of the senior management team at Airzon USA for almost 20 years. I'll let Ralf talk a little bit more about Alexanderwerk and what they do. But yeah, I see you already started sharing your screen, so the floor is yours, Ralf.
All right. I'm sharing the right screen, am I not?
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Well, thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Jessica. You guys did a stellar job, especially with the morning networking event, because that was at first a little awkward because it's like, how in the world do it? So I actually learned a thing. I also learned how to get it started because somebody posted a question, Aldi or Lidl. That was really, it was very helpful and also very fruitful. Now, today we're talking a little bit about the journey that we've been taking at Alexanderwerk. And one thing that Gary reminded me of in his presentation is, especially since we are talking about the German organizations and subsidiaries, I think we need to pay attention to the business culture. And I don't want to digress, but that's a whole topic in itself, because here in America, it is very centered on the speaker, not so much on the slides. whereas the presentation is it in especially Germany, and typically the information needs to speak for itself. And sometimes those presentation styles clash. And today I try to gear one for both factions. Do we have an idea of how many folks are signed on from Germany, Brooke?
I am not sure off the top of my head. I know registrations, we were about a third from Germany, 2/3 from the US. Who's
Okay.
actually here today? I know we do have some folks from Germany, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Richard was one of them whom I met. Okay, so without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Like Brooke said, I've been blessed to start working in the United States when I relocated from Germany in 1989 for Airs in USA, where I had many, many different roles. But I was part of the senior leadership team, and we created an awesome work environment, and also an interesting portfolio of marketing initiatives. Being in a technical role, I was working very closely with the marketing manager. I learned an awful lot. And in 2019, the opportunity arose to work with and for Alexanderwerk. And there's a lot of potential that I'm so excited about, helping also grow yet another subsidiary and help co-lead it. And what does Alexanderwerk do? It's a relatively old company. We make specialty equipment for the chemical and the also very much the pharmaceutical industry. You know it, made in Germany. It's top level quality, dependable, reliable, super energy efficient. We do take care of long-term sustainability, and it is really exciting because it's a company that is growing again after a couple of years of stagnation because of whatever reason. The economy goes up and down too, but in that level of growth, I was introduced into this organization. We have good products in tow. We have a good sales force, and we're poised to participate in shows. We have a rock solid reputation for providing good equipment, and then the epidemic hit. Now what? Just a little bit towards the machines, and because it's very abstract for most of them, but what these machines do is they help our customers take a very difficult to flow and process powder. We compact it and then granulate it to make it into an easy flowing powder. And where is that used? It is very often and primarily used in the pharmaceutical industry to take active and inactive ingredients, granulate it, and then push it into pill form. So many of the pills that you might be taking throughout your life, are made by and through dry roller compaction and granulation, and you may enjoy one that was made using our products. Another interesting application is battery mass. Like when you have any of these big old-fashioned batteries, CD cells, that black material on the inside gets compacted using one of our compaction and granulation machines, just as a backdrop of it. Again, we were set to go to shows, and then last March hit and nothing, right? Fortunately enough, and maybe I should just circle back really quick to the American subsidiary before I go into the shows and the digital marketing, because the German subsidiary is located in Montgomery, Pennsylvania. It was established in 1993 and was brought to this location in 2013, got renovated, upgraded in 2019. I have to highlight the help from the GACC in Chicago, because we also maintain an office there. And they were very helpful in trying to add more staff and full service technicians or field service engineers. And we built and rebuilt a a new lab that we use to collaborate with our customers. And this is back the tie-in. We had just completed a seminar in the fall of 2019, and we're poised to hold more seminars to help drive more lab traffic and also more collaboration by going to shows to bring customers back to our labs. And that's what I said happened to us, to everyone. Everything stopped that track. Brief word on digital marketing, because that is very often misunderstood. Because very often people, especially in Germany, just saying it's like, oh, that's CRM, that's using ERP, that is that's using the website, and it's like, maybe, but this is really more speaking to the fact of, is your SEO in order? Do you have and enjoy inbound marketing? How is inbound marketing circling back to websites? How is this all working? And I'm trying to sum this up in one powerful slide, which is this one, the inbound and outbound marketing wheel, if you will, because I'm not promoting that you are to only go one road or the other. Any of these things on the slide around the wheel is something that you should be engaging in. You should, however, concentrate on everything landing back at your website, so that whatever you do can be measured in some way or form. WebTracks is a product by Thomasnet that we use. It's kind of sort of like a souped up Google Analytics in Google Business. You use obviously CRM reports, because eventually you need to know, is any of this hitting? Because here, predominantly, especially if you have a specialized German-made piece of equipment or service, because this applies to both, really. A service provider from Germany is facing the same issues. It's typically a consultative sale. So you are drawn to shows, to seminars, in-person lunch and learns. So visiting the customers is really important, networking events, and even printed media. However, when that does not work, and that to me there is no either or, it's a yes and, you do need to focus on what else is out there. And this is what we kind of did, using virtual shows. And I think my co-presenter Tom will talk a little bit about that, shows and expos. We participated in those. Your social media activity, YouTube and videos still rock. Or I learned a little new thing about Gong, which I will check out here before long. Then I have to emphasize on Thomasnet briefly, because Thomasnet, who does not remember Thomas Register, that is now the digital version and has been for a while. They're extremely powerful, and especially for technical folks like ourselves, that is where you can get honed in technical info without first searching like crazy on Google. Email is still very important. However, be careful, because here is usually where people get overwhelmed with it and no longer read it, especially if it's salesy. And digital print, you need to have some other presence other than just the printed version of it. Maybe you can use both. Extremely powerful, just because you should be reflecting upon, how are you balanced? Or are you balanced? Do you have maybe a flat spot somewhere on your wheel? And without going deeper into the other elements, let me home in on the digital element and how important it is to be found. Because when Gary spoke of a funnel, imagine that this arrow is actually the sales funnel, the sales process funnel, and probably more or less the buying process funnel on its side. At the end, you have the purchase. Great. If you got the bid to an in and you are selected as the vendor, great. Hopefully you were on the short list and hopefully you were evaluated. If you do not engage in being able to be found on Google, on Thomasnet, on some of these platforms, good luck, because most likely if you are being pulled for a another quote, most likely it's really a Me Too proposal, and most likely you're going to having to conform to somebody else's specification. Not a good thing if you want for your sales efforts to be rewarded with a purchase order. So what you ought to, why you ought to focus on inbound marketing and digital, the digital approach is when first people specifying engineers, plant engineers, process improvement engineers, there are so many people around there that are looking for stuff. Where do they go? Usually they go on Google. If they are more on the technical engineering side or research side, they might go to ThomasNet. But you need to be discoverable. And in order to be able to, for you to be discovered, you need to have a top-notch website, and not because of the looks. The looks, yes, they're important, but what's happening in the background is just as important. Because when people do their research to then also leads to designing their new system, they need solutions. They don't want to be sold to, and that is the next slide. Your brand must be trustworthy. That is really much more a segue into being a solution provider. People like to, customers and prospects like to buy, but they don't like to be sold to. So you need to be trustworthy enough that you don't waste anybody's time. And that is true for you digitally as well as in person. But your brand presence on the website, you need to be able to say, is my SEO in order? Do I have social media, and how do I engage in it? Is it fluff, or is it of value? Brevity is your friend. Information is your friend, but it does need to link back to your website in one way, shape, or form. Become discoverable. Generate leads more easily by being very approachable. Because one thing that we did is we made it really easy to engage with us, and right from the website. It's really been very, very interesting, and how we, because of inbound marketing strategy, are now able to get to email addresses that we can then say, all right, you were interested for something once, but you go into our database and saying it's like, hey, we're going to nurture these contacts, and we're not going to bug you. We're not going to push to sell anything on you, but here we're hoping to engage you with, this is really a very useful piece of information. Tell me more. Because in that research and design, that cycle sometimes takes months, if not years, especially the more you are located in a niche of a niche, which most of our German companies are, like ourselves. It's great because this is where you can nurture this contact, that when they finally do go into an evaluation to make a purchase, you want to be the one whom they choose. And that's why I emphasize, keep in touch. You need to have email blasts, ebooks. If you have a lot of knowledge and content, publish it on your website. Make sure there's a backlink so you gather email info that you can then finally say, here's more of this stuff. Your blog posts can't be salesy blog, stuff. It has better be about tangible info that provides value, because only that way is your brand does your brand become trustworthy, and people think of you first because you're becoming the market leader also in thought and in the minds electronically, digitally. So here are a couple of things that we deployed that you might also want to think about deploying. Because here at this juncture, I have to say they're recommendations, because make this your journey. You need to see what fits. You need to be extremely aware of which continent you wake up on, in what market you are, what your brand image is all about, because we aspire to be the thought leaders for compaction, roller compaction, and dry granulation. Then everything that you say or do had better be geared towards that. So I would start with performing a digital health check. You can certainly get a hold of me. I can give you a good person to talk to about this, to to create your digital playbook, because things like, how is your website performing? Do you have SEO and how well is it? Does your website open fast enough? And that means on a computer as well as on mobile devices. There's a huge difference between the two sometimes. How does it display? The overall performance of your keywords. What gets measured gets done. And if for nothing else, if you haven't started it yet, you had better go ahead and go there, because the link back of your website and trying to get information about who is looking at you, for what reason, and is your audience aligned with what are you hoping to put out there in the market, it's absolutely omni-important. Then we were fortunate enough that we had just upgraded our computer system, so we use Teams extensively, and that was awesome, because not only can you invite your customers to collaborate with you finally, it's like this. I don't know has anybody counted how many Zoom meetings you've been to, or GoToMeetings, Skype? I mean, you name it. I have a whole range of tools to collaborate with your customers. But also don't forget to connect with your own salespeople, for them to be super focused on what it is that you want, because the personal contact has got to be there. You still have to carry on with any in-person contact, let it be now remotely or not. You have got to be able to do both and keep them focused and engaged. Also, we're humans. The loneliness factor of working remote and the stress that comes from not being able to hang out with people cannot be overlooked. So when you deploy many of these things, don't forget that you're working with people on the customer side as well as on your own side. Engage in optimizing your web presence. The SEO ranking, we were once a little bit more obscure and now made it to the top one page in the top 5 search results. Why is it important? Because we have very short attention spans. Just watch us do anything. It's just like, and we heard Gary say 9 minutes for a presentation. That is it. It's short if you have a technical consultation to do. Then the social media, you need to be careful, because again, some of things may work, some may not work, may not be suitable for you, because they are like too technical. So Facebook may not be your thing. However, things like Instagram and definitely LinkedIn with good information that is linked back to your website, it drives web traffic, it keeps people engaged, and all you need to, what you're shooting for is people to come to you because they actually start trusting you with your information. Create Google and WebTrax measurements. That WebTrax is a brand by ThomasNet. It helps you set benchmarks, because again, to me, very often when we talk here in America about anything, it's more in generalities. I believe in it's got to be worth your while. If you spend the money and the time in any of this, if you have a playbook, you also need to say, are we hitting anything, right? What are we doing this for? Am I getting more hits? Am I getting more inquiries? And I have to say, by engaging into these, we now have, there's very rarely a day that doesn't go by where we have an inquiry through our digital marketing efforts. The other thing that we had to learn was, lunch and learns. They're extremely effective, especially for custom equipment. And engineers out there, they draw an insane amount of value. And we figured out a way of like, how do you do a lunch and learn? How do you invite a customer into your lab, into your company, and invite your customer with more of your people, because people do business with people, not businesses. So the more they get to know your team and what you're capable of, and you invite them right into our labs, for instance, it's an awesome collaboration tool. Yes, you do need to make sure that technology is up to snuff. So that's really the bad news and the good news. It's really easy to do. However, because we have so much of this happening this year, doing remote everything, it raised the bar on the expectation as far as delivering results. Your deliverables of is the video grainy, is it clunky, do you have black spots in terms of reception or something like that. People lose traction really quick now because we got overexposed to the technology. But the other thing that you can do, since you already might have put video equipment or recording equipment into your workspace, make good use of that time to record videos of solutions that customers can help use in their daily lives or even buying decisions. So we always, when we're in the lab, we try to look for content to say, it's like, you know what, that solution, what we're doing right now is offering a certain solution for a certain market segment that we can turn into a quick video. And why video content is still so interesting, especially in a niche market, is you may only get like maybe 200, 700 views or something. But people who looked at that, they are already qualified, because those people, they are really interested in this stuff. Otherwise, they wouldn't be looking at it. And that is a huge opportunity for you, because those small little things really add up to a bigger sum. And they also add in your web traffic, which gives you more contacts, which is the last point. You do need to keep in touch with your customers and prospects no matter what. So you might as well do it. We're all hoping, obviously, that the pandemic crisis is hopefully going to subside and stop here pretty soon. And then the floodgates might open. Who knows what's going to happen? So you do need to mentally prepare for it. But one thing that I definitely will recommend to you is focus on digital health of your organization and your marketing and sales efforts. Don't make it your only one. Start with a digital health check, so you have at least something that you can go to your manager, go to your management, or if you are the manager yourself, you are about to learn how you're being discoverable out there in the world. And I think that is, if you did anything, and that is my call to action, that would be one thing that I could highly recommend you do, to just see how are you being perceived.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ralf. I think that was really an informative presentation. We do have a couple minutes for Q&A built at the end, but one question that did come up while you're presenting, I'll just ask quick, and then we'll move to Tom's presentation here shortly. So from what we understand, the product is very technical. How do you find that you bridge that gap, of course, for maybe engineers that like to feel things, understand the processes, really dive into the technical process? How do you find that you bridge that gap? Is it through videos, or what in your experience is the best tool for them to understand, of course, the highly technical engineering component of your product?
One, there are, because my, oh boy, how much time do we have, Brooke?
couple minutes, but yeah.
No, I think the brief answer is simply video content, picture content, and especially it is a niche market in the highly technical field. You have people who have already a lot of technical knowledge penned up. So a good white paper, a good ebook, any of those pieces of content, if you can put them on your website, and there's a like a link back to that, you can gather their email information, so you can finally say, it's like, here might be another thing for you to take a look at. But I would say the video, those three elements, video, ebook, and the other thing, to come to think of it, why digital discoverability is so important is also, if you're looking for talent, and the majority of the talent nowadays is going to be millennial or Gen Z, you had better have a good presentation out there, because millennial, and this is why I'm always so excited about millennials and Gen Zs, they will choose a place of work based on, is it worth my time, and how are you being perceived out there in the marketplace. I've had it during interviews where people say, it's like, I tried to look for you. That was like at the very beginning. It's like, but what do you guys do, right? So it gives you automatically, and this might be something that you might want to ask your HR people if they have gotten any feedback from people who look for jobs based on, hey, what do you, if you're being asked that, what do? You don't have enough things out there about your organization.
Very, very good insights. And that's kind of also a reason for the need for this webinar today, to talk about, of course, in those B2B business to business sales, when you have a highly complex, highly technical item, of course, how to bridge that digital gap. So appreciate it, Ralf, so much. At the end, we can ask a few more questions, but for the sake of time, I want to hand the screen over to my other presenter, last but not least, Tom Mitchell today. Thank you again, Ralf. Stay on, because at the end, we'll address other questions. But so Tom is the president of Messe Düsseldorf North America, headquartered in Chicago. I see that you're already sharing the screen, Tom. So without further ado, I will let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Thank you so much. You see the screen fine? All good?
Yep, all good.
All right, good. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to Gary and Ralf for teeing it up. I think what you guys presented was really, really good and laid a nice groundwork for what I'd like to talk about. So I'm the president of Messe Düsseldorf North America. For those of you in Germany, you certainly probably know Messe Düsseldorf, but for those that might not, we are one of the largest global trade show organizers in the world, based in Düsseldorf, Germany, and we operate about 70 different shows all over the world. Some are on different cycles, some are every year, some are every 2 or 3 or 4 years. It depends on the year. We do shows in Dusseldorf as our home base, as well as all over the world with high concentrations in places like China and India, Southeast Asia, and so forth. And we also run some events here in the United States. So our office is based in Chicago, and our job is to promote the business of Messe Düsseldorf here in the US, both bringing exhibitors and attendees over to the shows in Dusseldorf or wherever they may be, as well as organizing shows in the US. So we've been having it's been a fantastic business, the exhibition business, and we have a lot of really huge events, some of the top events in the world in certain industries. And we were looking forward to 2020 as going to be one of our better years, because we had a lot of shows converging on different cycles in one year. And then, as we all know, March last year came around, and the business ground to a halt. And I think no industry has been more affected probably than trade shows. It's one of the with restaurants and the hospitality industry and travel, it's something that the pandemic has absolutely destroyed in terms of the way things used to be and how people can do business. Everything has had to go virtual over the past year in terms of having any kinds of shows at all. There simply was no opportunity to have any events. And here you see a smattering of some large events that many of you may know that should have taken place in 2020, and they had to go virtual or not happen at all in some cases, because there simply was no way for people to travel. We in Dusseldorf have not, with one exception. We ran our large RV show last August. We were able to do that, and it was quite successful in person. But other than that, we have not had a show, an in-person, face-to-face show in almost a year now. And as I mentioned, 2020 should have been an amazing year for us in terms of all the shows that we had. And so we had to turn and do things a little differently. And you can see here 3 of the events that we have either done virtually or will do virtually in the coming year. And we never expected that this would happen, and we never really thought that a virtual event was something that we'd have to think about. And we all had to really move on overnight into changing our business model a bit. The trade show industry is perhaps for a lot of people an afterthought. You've all been to conferences, you've all been to exhibitions, but I think maybe it's not thought about or discussed how key it is and how many industries are interconnected that are supported by the trade show industry. So In the United States as well, there were almost no events in 2020 in terms of face-to-face, and many events went virtual in sometimes within the span of a month. They had no choice but to turn and do something virtual. So I'll get into that in a little bit, but just a few statistics to highlight how important trade shows are and how the exhibition industry in general, globally compared from 2019 to 2020, the industry itself contracted 68%, so almost 70% difference from 2019 to 2020, and that's massive because it's the output that's related to exhibitions. It's not just the shows, it's not just the organizers, it's all the infrastructure that supports those shows in cities like Dusseldorf and all over the world. Your restaurants, your hotels, your travel, your airlines, taxis, everyone is affected, and so that has been calculated at over 200 billion euros lost, or business that was not generated in 2020 simply because face-to-face events couldn't happen. And that comes to 2.4 million jobs that have been affected by having no shows. So, you know, it's really something that has to change and has to grow in terms of how we can do shows going forward. So when we talk about virtual and hybrid shows, what are those things and what does it mean? And the word virtual is thrown around to a lot of different people, and people think of it in different ways. But just a bit of a timeline before we get into that. So pre-2020, ever since the dawn of the internet, a lot of people have asked or questioned, how will the internet affect trade shows? Will that change things? Will that change conferences? But generally speaking, that did not happen. There were tools that you could use to help promote your shows, as my presenters talked about, but there really wasn't a real push into virtual. So, you know, a virtual trade show, what the hell is that? It wasn't done really at all. And in 2020, everything went virtual out of necessity. There were either two cases in 2020 for shows: cancel your show, postpone it, or try to do it virtually. And different companies did it in different ways, depending on their capabilities and depending on what they wanted to do. So my prediction and my feeling, and this is kind of my own general gut feeling, but based on a lot of the calls I've been on a lot of industry groups that have talked about what's the future of trade shows and what things are going to happen. We think for this quarter that we're in now and into the middle of the year, most of the shows that occur will be virtual and then start to translate or transfer into hybrid. And in 2022, toward the end of this year and into the future, I believe personally that the hybrid model will really stay with us. So, you know, virtual and hybrid, what's the real difference? Obviously, what we're doing now is 100% virtual, right? We're all sitting here together, talking to each other and interacting with each other, but we're all in our own homes and we're not together. Were this a hybrid event, and as I know Brooke has mentioned that there's some plans down the road to try to do these things in that way, some of us who couldn't or wouldn't be able to get together could participate virtually from wherever we are, but there's also an in-person component to that. And I think there's some real opportunities for trade show organizers in what hybrid offers. But I think the key I want to really leave everyone with and go on from this point of my presentation is that face-to-face is really the most important thing. We all want to be face-to-face. These tools that are out here now that allow us to fill that gap while we can't be face-to-face are really amazing and have changed our lives in some good ways, not in all good ways, but in many ways. But how do you do virtual shows? I'm sure probably at this point, all of you have been to a virtual conference or trade show of some kind. I know I have. Some have been really good, some have been not so good. Some organizers have had the misfortune of having to do it very quickly when the pandemic started, so they didn't have a lot of experience, they didn't have the tools. There's new platforms coming out all the time. It's dizzying what's available, but I think what's very key, and you can see here on the screen what is a digital event and what isn't. You have to remember that not everything translates perfectly from in-person to virtual. Gary said it really well in his presentation. He said that virtual is not a substitute for the process. It's a tool, and it can get you in front of people when there's no other way to do that. But it's not a substitute. And a digital event, if you're going to attend one and if you're going to organize one, you have to understand what it is and what it isn't. You need to prepare content that can be live streamed, of course, and that can be done in an efficient manner. You need the tools to do that. but you have to make sure that it's not just someone sitting in front of a screen reading off of a presentation. People are not going to sit in front of a computer for an entire day and do that. And all of you who have been to physical conferences, you sit in a conference for a little bit, you might step out to take calls, you might go and do something else to network with someone. You need to take that into account. It's not simply taking the physical event and just throwing it all up live. Exhibitions, an actual trade show and expo floor, of which we have quite a few. Most of the shows in Dusseldorf, I would say, are very much a trade show rather than a conference. Those are harder to replicate because exhibitors want to show their product working. We have a very large machinery shows in Dusseldorf where you can walk in to a booth and see the printing press or the extruding machine or the glass making machine that you are thinking about spending a lot of money on. You can see it in operation, and that is difficult to replicate in virtual setting. But there are ways to do it, but you have to know that what you're serving to your audience is not necessarily the same thing as they would be in person. There are other issues that, frankly, some of us really didn't think about when we started going down this road of what we're going to do virtually. How are we going to show a virtual event? We did an event in November for our medical show. The Medica event takes place every year in Dusseldorf in November, very large med tech show. So normally it takes place from 10 to 6 German time in Dusseldorf. Well, if there's virtual content, think about your time zone issue. If we are here in the United States and we want to take part in some of the sessions that are happening in the morning Germany time, what time do we have to get up here in the United States? So you need to think about the content that you're going to have, especially because content lends itself better to virtual, obviously, than an expo in some ways. How are you going to manage that time zone difference? And there's been a term thrown around in the industry now, the Netflixication of the conference industry. Not everything you do necessarily has to be streamed live. You can have a lot of on-demand content that companies can come and look at, or attendees can look at, not only when it's happening, but later when it's more convenient for them. We live in the world where everyone wants to stream everything on their own time, on demand. They want it on their own schedule. And I think for the exhibition industry, this is a big change of how we might need to move forward. It's been talked about in a lot of the calls that I've been on with other industry partners, and anecdotally from the United States, virtual has brought us a good and a bad in terms of our attendance. A lot of shows that have had to go virtual in 2020 found a real spike in attendance, and that means in the number of bodies that registered for an event. And that makes sense, of course. If you don't have to get on a plane, you don't have to get on a hotel to go someplace, sure, I'll register for an event, especially if it's free. Why would you not do that? So they found that registration really went up, and it's a good way to connect with people that you might not, as a show organizer, have had in your event before. But they generally found that engagement went down. And if you're sitting in front of a computer all day, at some point the fatigue gets to you, and people just aren't necessarily comfortable connecting in that way. So the hybrid portion of things, as I mentioned, is something that I feel going forward is really going to be a help to the trade show industry. It will take a while for things to recover. The face-to-face will be back for sure, but organizers will have to know that it is one event that you want to have, but it's two different experiences. Ralph said it, you're working with people, right? And you have to make sure that even though you're providing certain content, what you provide to your people, your face-to-face people, should be a different experience than what you provide to those that are on site. But at the same time, you want them to have that shared experience, because community is what you're trying to build with trade shows. A lot of what's not considered, I think, in many ways, is the exhibitor's point of view on all of these things. So as organizers, we talk about best practices for doing virtual or hybrid events and what needs to change and what doesn't. But I've heard from a lot of our exhibitors, as well as other people I know in the industry, organizers, and what their exhibitors are saying. And by and large, most exhibitors will tell you they're not going to do a virtual show just because it's there. If you say, hey, we have a virtual show, that doesn't mean they're going to show up. Budgets have changed, and a lot of companies still have budgets to do events, but it doesn't mean that they're going to spend it all on a virtual event or a face-to-face event. The ROI is still very difficult to predict, and I know we're in our infancy in terms of virtual events, but I did hear from one exhibitor the other day, which I thought was really interesting and wanted to share that the budgets have shifted. So this particular exhibitor still has 70% of their budget earmarked for live and 30% for digital. How will that change down the road? And how do you have to take advantage of that? You simply can't tell an exhibitor, put all your money, the same money you would spend at our physical show, into this virtual show, because you need to show them that it's something that's going to happen for them. There's trust needed as we get back to the point of when will we have face-to-face events, and we all want to have them back. Exhibitors need to know that the venues and the organizers are not just going to throw the same event up there as it was before, but that they have their best interests in mind, and that they really work as partners. Before, we always, I think, tried to do our best to take into account what our customers wanted to see and how they wanted the show to be. And this is going to be even more key in the future. You have to have an open dialogue with exhibitors, because they need to tell us, why do we want to be at the show and what's it's going to be for us. So I think some interesting ideas about what's coming back. First, corporate events have really already started to take off, because some of the bigger companies, the Apples of the world, the GMs, the Fords of the world, they can run a corporate event and people will show up. But for a lot of the smaller companies in the Mittelstand, as an example in Germany, that's what our trade shows thrive on. These companies need shows to get out there and find customers. And it was talked about earlier in the presentation. They miss the networking. That's very hard to replicate in a virtual setting. And the demand is still out there. In some cases, there's a lot of pent-up demand, but you can't necessarily find new exhibitors or new customers as an exhibitor simply through virtual. You have a relation to your previous customers, but you can't necessarily find the new ones. So what's the status of face-to-face events and the challenges of what's holding them back? And these are things that we all know. It's really difficult to travel now. It's really difficult to ship your equipment. If you're going to come to a show and the show's planned for later this year, when do you need to ship? The logistics folks on this call will tell you all of a sudden those timelines have gone much further out, and you need to be prepared to get your equipment to that show. But what if it doesn't happen with so much uncertainty? The quarantines, whether you have to quarantine when you come home or not, what you have to show to get into a country. There's so many things that are holding back live events. And there's going to be changes. Space requirements. Are you going to have more space so that you can socially distance? A lot of vendors now in the trade show industry, especially the smaller mom and pops, they are simply not going to be there anymore because they could not survive financially. They've been out of work with zero revenue since this started. So there's a lot of different things that are happening and challenges that are going to happen in the industry. And what is it that's going to help our industry go forward and help face-to-face come back? It's pretty clear now in all of the discussions that we in the industry have had for the past year is, the vaccination process is absolutely key, but as well as on-site rapid testing. And the technology has come so far, it's really amazing in the last year. There's a show going on right now in Orlando that 3 of the largest for-profit organizers in the world are putting on a fashion show. And to get into that show, you must have a negative COVID test. And if you show up there, you can get one with the results in 15 minutes. If it's negative, you get a wristband and then you go to the show. But you still have to wear masks. I do believe masks are here to stay for a while. I'm not a huge fan of masks. I doubt many of us are, but I do think they're going to be in play for a long time. But once we get to that point of rapid testing and the vaccination that everyone can hopefully have by midsummer, at least in the United States. I read an interesting article yesterday that some data scientists who've been pretty on point so far with their predictions for the pandemic think we'll get in the US to herd immunity somewhere in the summer, and that they're predicting a lot more face-to-face can happen and toward the end of 2021. That's the United States, but what happens for the rest of the world? You still have, especially for us as an international organizer, it's really important to have an international presence. So what about Latin America? They're lagging behind in terms of vaccinations. What about parts of Europe? So it's really key to get these things in place so that we can have face-to-face, but still allow customers to take part if they can't or if they're not ready. And that's why I think the hybrid will be a really important thing for the future. We have to win back the hearts and minds of our exhibitors and attendees. So people have probably taken trade shows and exhibitions and conferences for granted a bit in the past. I always went to this show, so I'll go again. Exhibitors said, well, or organizers said, this exhibitor has always been there, so they're always going to come back. But things have changed, and we need to show that this is something that's still important, that's something that's still useful, and how can we change with the way the world has been now to make it something that can thrive in the future. So at the very end, I'd like to leave everyone with a little smile, because I know we've all been on virtual now for almost 2 hours. So if you're a fan of this movie, which I know Brooke is, perhaps other people know this is from Office Space, but we've all been on countless Zoom calls, and we've all been on virtual, and the whole mute unmute thing is really, I'm surprised no one's made a TV show about it yet. But the same kind of humanity, the same kind of the same way that we interact with people, it's not necessarily any different if you're face to face or if you're in a digital setting. Yeah, the intricacies have changed a little bit, but I think what this has taught us is that you have to still be human, and the digital aspect is here to stay. And I think if we do it properly, it can really make us better humans. But the challenges still remain there, and if we all work together, that will be a thing that we'll get through. And perhaps one of the silver linings of this entire thing is people have realized the need to work together a little bit better, and that's really important.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, when you sent me your presentation, I just did a quick run through, and I did get a little chuckle out of that last slide. So thank you for sharing that with us. I think what you said definitely sums it up, the need. Again, of course, travel bans, quarantine, differing quarantine regulations, and of course, logistics are huge issues. And so thank you for sharing everything digital. We do have a couple of questions. First being on your view of the length and duration of virtual shows versus traditional shows. So I don't know if that's something in your industry, of course, you could speak on. Yeah, that question.
Sure. I think that really it's different for everyone depending on what they're trying to accomplish. I know for one of our events, I'll use as an example in the United States, which we'll hold later this year. We feel that it's going to be a face-to-face event based on the timeline and how things are developing, and we very much hope it will be. But we do plan to have that hybrid component to it. And for those people that are there face-to-face, we will try to put on a similar show and experience to what they're used to. But for the hybrid portion, for the people that are virtual, I think you have to let them choose how much they want to engage. Provide the content, provide the opportunities, and if someone can't attend the show on the 3 days that it happens, that's fine. The content will be there for them to interact with later. So it's really a matter of what you're trying to get across. I do believe that there is no way you can have let's say a standard show is about 8 hours of the day from the beginning of it to the end. You can't ask someone to participate virtually for 8 hours. It just doesn't happen. They're going to dive in and dive out. As long as you give them that opportunity to meaningfully do that, I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said too about concentrated engagement. So when you do have them online, what options are there available, of course, to engage in the trade show versus, maybe in person where you have a lot more downtime, things like that. One more question I see also from Peter is, do you feel the major trade shows will all develop their own online platforms and all standardize on a few existing ones? And which would make it easier as an exhibitor, of course?
That's a very good question. I know there's been a lot of companies that have been trying to develop their own. In the US, a lot of the for-profit organizers are looking to actually acquire technologies that exist out there so that they can make it their own proprietary. I think for the moment going forward, there's going to be, at least into the next year, there's going to be a lot of different platforms that will be quite varied. I know this makes it somewhat difficult for exhibitors if you're participating in multiple shows and you've got to relearn certain platforms. There are a few leaders out there, industry leaders that tend to be used by a lot of the larger ones. But I think going forward, there will be a standardization, not necessarily in terms of the actual platform that's being used, but in terms of the experience. We're all going to school over this year and this last year and this coming year on what works and what doesn't work. And I think you'll find, just like a regular show, when you show up at a physical show, registration is normally kind of the same, and the conference experience is normally kind of the same. They all do the same things with food service. All the organizers will find a way to make the online experience somewhat standardized despite the difference in platforms.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I had built in a little 10-minute Q&A at the end, but we kind of ate that time up with the presentations, which is not a bad thing. I do just have one question each one question for Ralf and then one more question for you, Tom. Maybe I'll jump to Ralph. If you can, just a question how you engage your sales staff as well as your customers in large meetings. I asked a similar question to Gary. The question came in from the audience. Of course, in a large situation or large sales situation, how do you engage everyone in a virtual meeting at Alexanderwerk?
Thank you, Brooke. Yeah, that's an interesting question. Before, I have to say, before the pandemic, we hadn't really, we had plenty of stuff to do every day, things to do, places to go. And what especially Teams helped us do is having a weekly, like a fixed weekly meeting schedule where we say it's like, what do we want to do? What do we want to get done? Is there anything working towards a bigger goal? What new content can we share? Because we did the virtual expo and shows that are indeed a lot more concentrated, but keeping salespeople engaged who are so used to being on the road is definitely, it's a challenge. We kind of channeled that also into doing lab tests or even lunch and learns in-house, and that kept customers going. In one instance, we were able to even do a customized video presentation with a customer's material. And that is definitely something that lit up the salespeople.
Perfect. I know originally a few questions ago in the chat, we had a question about podcasts. You mentioned you do videos. Do you also integrate podcasts into your sales strategy at all?
I've looked at it, and podcasts, they are, like, to me, number two in terms of like what you can do with it. For the type of information that we have, I don't think we're there just yet, because if you need to have a voice, meaning not from a sound point of view, but you need to have a voice of what you want to deliver, because then if you create good content, you attract money and people by whom you become and the content that you deliver. So podcasts, if you have something that is worthy delivering and it's brief, brevity is your friend, put it out there and link it back. It may not be a fit for a niche market of a niche market, because there are maybe not too many people interested in it. But for bigger topics like logistics or software or sales or something like that, definitely it's an awesome platform.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. Then I do have one question for Tom, but Ralph, I just wanted to thank you while I have you in your attention. Thank you again so much as a speaker. For all of our attendees that are still on, as well as the ones that were on earlier and had to leave, I'll be sure to share the contact information if anybody wants to contact Ralph about his sales strategy, or maybe you're looking for a granulation machine, of course. They can reach out to you and get further information. So thank you, Ralph, for your time. And then Tom, I did have one question for you, is if you could recommend a prep strategy for these virtual trade shows. When you're in person, we have our sales pitches, we have our machines. What do you recommend for companies joining virtually to really prepare to share their company in kind of an abstract way, if you will?
That's a good question. I think in a lot of ways, you have to prepare similarly as to how you would be doing for a face-to-face show, right? And I think a lot of companies don't do that. A lot of exhibitors show up at events without the necessary prep because they just think, well, the business is going to come to me. Well, in the virtual setting, it's going to be even harder for the business to come to you. So you have to be prepared for what you're going to present, of course, but the pitch is a little bit different. At a show, you may have time to make small talk and time to sit down with someone and have coffee and talk over things and show things. For virtual, you're going to have a very limited amount of time. I think Gary had the 9-minute rule. You probably even have less than that in a virtual setting. So if you're going to be doing virtual presentations as an exhibitor, make sure that what you're getting your point across can be done in, I would say, 5 minutes or less. Then there'll be time to take someone offline later if they're really interested. And I think you need to know what your audience is too. Are you talking to an international audience? Are you talking to a local audience? How are these people going to react in terms of different culture? You still have all the same things that you have to do for a regular show, but the attention span is the key thing, which isn't there anymore. And you need to make sure that both your tech and the culture of your salespeople can be adapted to that.
Perfect. I think that makes a lot of sense. And definitely, I think with people's attention span fleeting straight and to the point, yeah, seems like the way to go in a virtual setting. On that note, I don't see any other questions right now. So as I mentioned with the other speakers, if anyone would like to contact Tom, we'll be sure to share his contact information if you're curious about any virtual trade shows coming up or even hybrid looking into 2022 perhaps. Thank you again to all of our attendees, as well as a special thanks to our speakers. I thought it was a really informative event, and I hope you also benefited from it as well. Please stay tuned for future events. As Jessica alluded to, we'll dive into quite a variety of topics this year, looking at different challenges and threats posed by the pandemic, and we look forward to providing you with new insights as well as best practices. And as you know, I'll have my contact information. If there's any follow-ups you would like from this, it was in the registration to the email. And at that note, we will conclude a little 10 minutes later, but thank you for sticking with us. So thank you again, everyone.